Our guest today is a palliative care physician, a mother, and an advocate for victims and survivors of domestic violence. Dr. Jennifer Kagan-Viater lost her daughter Keira in 2020 at the age of 4 in an apparent murder-suicide involving Keira's father. The family believes Keira's death was preventable, that she would be alive today had judges and the family court system recognized that domestic violence can impact parenting. Dr. Kagan-Viater joins us today, along with her husband Philip, a family law lawyer. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It's been just over 2 years since Keira's passing. How are you and your family doing?
You know what, Lianne, it has been very difficult. I think what some people may not realize is that for others watching our story, 2 years have gone by, but for us, it feels like Keira was killed just yesterday. And if anything, the grief gets worse. We miss our daughter terribly, and we still have to deal with these very same institutions that failed Keira so miserably.
And it should be mentioned that you and your family have been so open with sharing this incredible tragedy. But I wonder, what gives you hope that the devastating loss of your young daughter and stepdaughter will not be in vain?
So the fact that there is a lot of strong public outcry as to the failures of the system for Keira, and really that there's unanimous agreement that the system is so broken and needs to change. Ultimately, if we can get some meaningful changes implemented, along with a significant culture shift in terms of taking domestic violence seriously, then we're hoping we can really help other victims of violence and children who are in situations that similar to what I was in and what Keira was in.
Let's unpack that a little bit more. What are some of the key red flags that you believe the court and others missed along the way that could have changed the ending of this story for you and your family?
So I could step in a little bit here, just because I'm also a family law lawyer, for people who may not know. And, in my view, a lot of the problems were that the court, and especially the Child Protection Agency involved with us, Jewish Family and Child Services, weren't taking the coercive control and non-physical abuse seriously enough. And even when we were continuing to say, her ex-husband is escalating and escalating and escalating, and things are getting a lot more serious, it was minimized. It was explained away, ignored. And the other problem was that whenever there would be not a threat, but whenever the court would admonish her ex and say, look, if you continue to act this way, we're going to take access away from you, they just wouldn't act on it. And so I think he knew at a fairly early stage that he can do what he wants. And this current court culture of pro-contact at almost all costs was going to save him. So it just continued, and until the very end, unfortunately.
Along those lines, then, when you look at it, why do you believe that these red flags that you just talked about were missed or overlooked?
Well, for one, I think the court deferred a lot to, for example, Jewish Family and Child Services, instead of being that final gatekeeper that they're tasked with being. And when you look at what are these child protection agencies, in our case, we started off with 2 extremely junior workers. I don't think they had much experience with domestic violence. I don't even think they had much, if any, training at all about domestic violence. And when I would speak to those workers myself and even put stuff in writing, they didn't seem to get it at all. And the courts are then relying on their investigation. And quite frankly, I felt that they weren't qualified to do the work that they were tasked of doing. They had one task, which was to save Keira and protect her. And that's the one task that they refused to do.
Now, one of the key considerations for the courts is that the trial judge said that the domestic violence against you was not relevant to parenting, and he would not let you testify about all the details of the abuse. What is your response to that sort of rationale?
So this is completely wrong, and it really shows why judges need education, not only in domestic violence and risk of lethality, but also really how to act in these types of cases. what we know about domestic violence is that when a woman is at risk, so are the children. And really, safety needs to be at the forefront. So it's completely wrong. I can't say it more eloquently than that, I don't think.
Well, I'll just jump in there because I'll tell you that the Supreme Court of Canada actually just confirmed that as well in one of their recent decisions that just came out in May. It's Barron, Drecht, and Glubliunis. I apologize, I can't pronounce it. But the Supreme Court actually has now finally confirmed for all judges in the entire country that that is an untenable comment to make, that you could be an abusive parent, an abusive spouse, but a good parent.
You consider that a victory?
Look, our child is gone, and I'm hoping that part of why they finally recognize this publicly 2 years later may have been in part premised on her legacy. So it's a victory in that sense. So to hopefully protect other victims and children.
Let's talk about Bill C-233, called Keira's Law. It's an act that would amend both the Criminal Code and the Judges Act. Can you tell us how did it come to be, its current status, and its potential impact if it is indeed passed into law?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking about Keira's Law, Bill C-233, which is a private member's bill that was tabled by MP Andrew Dillon in February of this year. I'll tell you a little bit about what it does to answer your question. So there's two parts to Bill C-233. The part that amends the criminal code basically provides that judges consider ankle monitoring devices in cases where someone is accused of committing a violent offense against an intimate partner. And the Keira's Law piece, which is the other part of it, it amends the Judges Act to provide for education for federally appointed judges on domestic violence and coercive control. Currently, there's no mandatory training on domestic violence and its impacts on parenting. And when we reviewed the Canadian Judicial Council trainings, that their website where they train judges, in the last 7 years, they have only offered one course on domestic violence, and it was offered for the Atlantic provinces only. And that's in 7 years. And, this bill, if passed, I'll tell you the stage in a moment, but if passed in the Senate, it will be one step further towards saving lives of victims and children in situations of domestic violence. It's critically important that judges receive education and training on domestic violence, coercive control, risk of lethality, and how to act and make decisions in these cases that put the safety at the forefront. It came about due to the wonderful efforts of MPs Andrew Dillon, who tabled this bill, MP Pam Dimoff, MP Yara Sachs, and really politicians across party lines who voted in favor. We're really grateful to the MPs that were involved in this, and the bill passed unanimously in the House of Commons in June of 2022, which was just 4 months after it was originally tabled. So it moved through very, very quickly. It's now going to go to the Senate in the fall, and we're hopeful that it will be enacted into law soon thereafter if all goes well.
Dr. Kagan, you endured abuse during your marriage to your ex-husband, Keira's father. Can you take us through some of the examples of the coercive control that he exerted on you?
If I may just explain a little bit about what coercive control is, I think it may be helpful to set the context. Mm-hmm. Coercive control is a really dangerous type of behavior. It involves a pattern of behavior which, is harm involving threats, intimidation tactics, humiliation, or other abuse to really harm or punish a victim. And it's about power and control. It's about the perpetrator sending a message, I'm in control, and if you disobey, there are going to be consequences. In terms of what I experienced, I can definitely give you a few examples. During the marriage, threats that he will never let me divorce him, saying things that I'm his property and he can do whatever he wants to me. I actually had a tracking device placed on my car unbeknownst to me. At the time, I found out about it after separation, demanding to know the passwords to all my devices and my whereabouts at all times. And these are just a few examples only to give you a sense of that type of behavior. Post-separation, really what it looked like was using Keira as a tool to harm me. So things like abducting Keira against a court order, obstructing court order telephone calls. If there was something that he didn't like, let's say he got a letter from the lawyer or whatnot, he would retaliate. Things like, breaking a cherished possession to send me a message. One of, Keira's possessions from my house would come home broken. And on one occasion, actually, a piece of her hair was even cut off in retaliation. So it's these cumulative, it's the pattern of all of these acts that's sending me a message that he's in control, and if I don't obey him, that there's going to be a punishment and a consequence to me. And it's terrifying to be the victim and trying to extricate yourself from somebody who is so obsessive and coercively controlling like that. It truly becomes a nightmare for any victim to be entrapped with somebody like that who is so dangerous.
Thank you for sharing those examples, because there are going to be people who listen to this interview who may experience similar things happening to them and may not, see that as something potentially, ultimately, very dangerous for themselves or their families. So thank you for that. Now, Dr. Kagan, you left the marriage a few months after Keira was born. When you look back on it, what, if anything, could you or would you have done differently?
So, I don't think there was anything I could have done differently other than, staying in that house, which was a threat to my life and obviously a threat to Keira's life. The problem wasn't whether I could have done anything differently. As I identified the danger really early on and I extricated myself from that situation. But there was a huge problem in that when I sought protection for Keira through the system, that the people who were tasked with protecting me and Keira refused to do it. And not only did they refuse, they forced Keira to have unsafe contact with her dad and, enabled him to abuse Keira and me. I wish I had other something else to tell you for a victim who is trapped in that sort of situation. Because, I did all of the right things that I was told to do. Victims are, they're told to leave the situation, but you cannot rely on the system to protect a child in this type of situation, unfortunately.
Certainly your efforts and that of your husband have cast a very bright spotlight on this story, and certainly on the whole issue of intimate partner violence, domestic abuse. What advice could you offer a parent who may find themselves in a similar situation where they fear for the safety of their child at the hands of their ex-spouse or spouse? What could you say to them to help them, encourage them, and potentially point them in a different direction?
Your question is difficult because you're asking for encouragement, and the only encouragement I could offer at this stage is people need to continue to speak up and speak out and continue to demand changes in the current court culture, along with significant changes to the people who the courts rely upon, such as these social workers, children's aid protection workers, even police officers. They need to be taking this more seriously. Right now, based on the current court culture, it's a game of roulette. You'll either get a judge that's abuse informed and will try to assist you, or you may get a judge that is not as informed, such as Jennifer's judge, and cause you even more harm and completely will enable the abuse to continue in effective perpetuity. So we need to speak up. Right now, you have to deal with it as a form of damage control. You're not going to be able to fully protect your child if you are connected to an abusive spouse, absent significant changes. And that's why we are speaking up and out to get those changes done.
As you are both very well aware, and certainly those listening to this interview, the incidents of domestic violence and intimate partner abuse have escalated dramatically during the COVID-19 pandemic. This topic has received all kinds of media attention from your stories and others as well. What would you say has struck you most as you grapple with your own situation, the aftermath of it, and what is happening in society on this issue currently?
Absolutely. And thank you, Lianne, for shining a light on this issue. And, it's so important that we keep talking talking about this and keep shining a light. I agree, 1 in 4 women experience domestic violence at minimum, and the statistics are very grim, right? I mean, according to the Canadian Femicide Observatory, 1 woman is killed somewhere in Canada every day and a half. 30 to 40 kids a year killed by a violent parent. I mean, domestic violence is a public health crisis of horrific proportions, and leaders need to do more. The media is really engaged. The Canadian public is really engaged on these issues, and people were so compelled by our story and want to help. And the Canadian public is paying very close attention to all of the media coverage on this issue. But there needs to be more action from government. Here in Ontario provincially, I mean, we have these recommendations from domestic violence death review committees dating back years and years, and there needs to be implementation of these recommendations. With this public outcry, we call on leaders to do their part to change this. I mean, we're really grateful for the leaders we've worked with federally who have started some of these changes on that federal level. And, along with other advocates, we're calling on the government of Ontario and provincial governments to step up and provide that needed help to victims of violence and children, so that these femicides and filicides don't happen anymore.
Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I would encourage victims of violence to reach out to the local shelter, connect with a worker there, and try to seek help that way. Even in light of everything we've talked about today, it's still important to ensure your safety. And we're hoping that with changes and advocacy, that the culture of the courts will shift favorably.
And I could just add as well that in January of this year, the Department of Justice Canada put out this thing. It's called a help toolkit, identifying and responding to family violence for family law legal advisors. And even though the target of this was people such as social workers and lawyers, I would suggest and recommend that victims review this help toolkit, at least as a starting point, ensure that their advisors are familiar with it and understand it and can argue it. And then hopefully that can help save some lives as well.
Dr. Jennifer Kagan-Viater, Philip Viater, thank you both for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you very much for having us.